My name is Camille Alden. I'm 44 years old, retired colonel from the United States Air Force. I've flown reconnaissance in dust storms so thick you couldn't see the wings. I've watched base flags lowered after casualties no one back home ever heard about. And I've walked into briefing rooms with my heart still shaking from what I saw out there, then stood at attention like nothing touched me. None of that, not Kandahar, not Fallujah, not the endless nights in command tents, prepared me for the 7 words my mother sent me at Charlotte Airport just 5 minutes before boarding. No space. Don't come. Not wanted. That was it. No explanation. No punctuation. Just the kind of cruelty that doesn't bother dressing itself up. I stood there with boarding pass in one hand, coffee in the other, and reread it twice. Then I looked down the terminal, where families were gathering, with arms slung around shoulders, children laughing, couples bickering over gate numbers. The world kept turning unbothered by one more person quietly being erased. I typed back only 2 words. Understood. Goodbye. Then I walked. I boarded the flight I had paid for, the one I had organized for all of them. I didn't turn around. I didn't check for replies. Some wounds go so deep you stop feeling them. You just keep moving, because if you stop, the pain might notice you again. I took my seat. Row 12C window. The seat I always picked, quiet away, unseen. 5 minutes later, the engines slowed. The pilot stepped out. The entire cabin turned, and then he looked directly at me and said, "Ma'am, I believe you saved my life." The gate agent scanned my pass without looking up. Her voice was cheerful, in a way that made my skin prickle. "Enjoy your flight," she said. I nodded once and stepped onto the jet bridge. The air shifted the moment I crossed that threshold, the kind of shift you feel more, then hear cooler, stiller. I could already smell the recycled cabin air ahead, sharp with coffee and pressurized steel. My hand gripped the boarding pass a little tighter. Row 12C window. Not the most expensive seat, but one of the better ones. I'd booked it because I didn't want to be seen. Funny how that didn't work out. I walked past rows of strangers, stowing bags, adjusting headrests, flipping through safety cards. My family, if you could still call them that, was nowhere in sight. They had boarded before me. Of course they had. I found my seat, stowed my duffel, and sat. Straight-backed hands, folded eyes forward. That discipline never left, not even after retirement. The plane hummed faintly beneath me, its systems alive and waiting. Just as I was about to settle into the stillness, a flight attendant approached. Early 30s, tidy bun, practiced smile. She leaned slightly into the aisle. "Excuse me, ma'am," she said quietly. "Would you be willing to switch seats? There's a family up front who would like to sit together." I looked up. Something in her tone told me this wasn't just a random ask. "Which family?" I asked. She hesitated, glanced to her left. I followed her eyes. Row 8. My mother pristine and cream knit. My father reading something on his phone. My brother Joel animatedly talking to his wife. None of them looked my way, not even once. "They requested it," I asked again. She nodded. "Yes, ma'am. They said you're traveling together, but preferred to adjust for comfort." Comfort. I almost laughed. I was the discomfort, the unsightly limb they needed to rearrange. I could have said no. I had every right to. But rights don't matter when love has been bartered for silence, so I unbuckled my belt, lifted my bag, and followed her finger down the aisle. Row 30, seat B, middle. As I walked past my family, not one of them turned. I was a ghost who had paid for their comfort. When I sat down between a sleeping teenager and a man too absorbed in his emails to notice me, the only thing I could feel was the cold edge of the metal seatbelt against my ribs. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. But somewhere deep beneath the stillness, something shifted, and it wasn't going back. The air back here felt thinner. Not physically, just in the way things feel when dignity has been stripped from them. The overhead lights flickered, casting a pale wash over frayed seat fabric and the dull shimmer of old tray tables. I kept my hands still on my lap fingers, curled just enough to hide the tremor. Across the aisle, a child chattered happily to his grandmother about dinosaurs. The words barely registered. What I did notice was the pressure in my left knee. A familiar ache, dull and deep, the kind that never quite leaves. An injury from a roadside blast outside Sharana. Not the worst explosion I'd seen, but the one that stayed with me. A splintered joint, titanium pins, and months of rehab while my commanding officer kept asking if I was sure I wanted to return to the field. I was sure. I'd always been sure. Because going back into the silence of that family house would have been a different kind of injury, one I wouldn't recover from. I stared ahead at the seat back in front of me, fingers tracing the edge of my armrest. I remembered another chair, another moment 12 years old, sitting on the edge of our porch after being kicked out for backtalking about something I'd read in a history book. I'd sat there barefoot freezing for hours. No one came to get me. When I finally walked back inside, my mother barely looked up from her crossword. She never liked questions. I grew up learning how to fold myself small enough to fit inside the space between their expectations. Smile at the right moments. Stay quiet during dinner. Let Joel shine. Always let Joel shine. In the military, there were no family dinners, no shifting pecking orders. There was rank earned or not. And just once, that rank had saved a man's life. His name had faded over the years, but I remembered the fire. I remembered the way the Humvee had flipped after the IED hit the smoke curling from the engine block, the split-second decision to crawl beneath the burning wreckage, with my own knee already shattered. I pulled him out. I pulled all three of them out. No one pinned a medal to that. But sometimes I dreamed of his face. Not with clarity, just the sense of someone I didn't let die. A loud clang above startled me. Someone was forcing an overhead bin closed. I blinked, pulled back into the present. The child across the aisle was giggling again. I shifted slightly, adjusting my posture, ignoring the way my knee resisted. And as I settled again into that cramped middle seat, the pilot's voice crackled faintly over the intercom with routine pre-flight checks. I didn't know it then, but someone else remembered that day in the desert. And he was sitting 40 feet ahead of me, behind a locked cockpit door. We began to taxi. The low hum of the engines grew steadier beneath my feet, vibrating up through the soles of my boots and into the knot just behind my ribs. It was always that way. The rhythm of flight, predictable, indifferent, had become more familiar to me than the voice of my own mother. I kept my eyes on the tiny oval window beside me. Outside, the tarmac shimmered in the early light heat waves rising off metal and asphalt. Inside, the cabin buzzed with the dull ritual of preparation. Seat belts clicked tray tables, snapped bags were kicked further under seats. My family, I imagined, was already sipping sparkling water in row 8, chatting about wedding colors, and who would sit where at the rehearsal dinner. They hadn't looked back once. I shifted my leg, trying to ease the throb in my knee, and caught my reflection faintly in the window. Gray at the temples now, lines at the corners of my mouth that hadn't been there 5 years ago. But my posture still held, straight, composed, like every formation briefing I'd ever given. The seat beside me remained empty for a moment longer, and I let that brief silence stretch. I needed it. Then a voice, soft but steady, cut through the noise. "Excuse me," a young woman said as she slid into the window seat beside me. Her face was fresh, 22 maybe. College sweatshirt, paperback in hand, earbuds dangling like forgotten jewelry. She smiled awkwardly. "Sorry, was just trying not to elbow you." I nodded once. "You're fine." She paused, then glanced at the name patch stitched onto my duffel bag, wedged at my feet. Her brows lifted. "Were you military?" she asked, voice cautious, respectful. I hesitated. The answer always brought weight expectation assumptions. But something in her tone was gentler than most. "Yes," I said simply. "Air Force." She smiled again. "My dad was Army, deployed twice. He used to tell me stories about a woman who pulled him from a convoy after a blast. Said he never got her name, but she saved his life." The words landed like a quiet chord striking somewhere deep. I didn't speak. Couldn't. She looked out the window again, not pressing further, just letting the words hang between us like something sacred. From the cockpit, I heard the door open. A shadow moved forward, just out of view. I didn't think anything of it until I caught the barest flicker of movement. A glance that lingered a second too long. A face turned my way before vanishing again. Captain Michael Rylan. 15 years ago, I'd dragged him from a burning transport vehicle under fire. He'd been unconscious, his uniform soaked in diesel and blood. I never thought I'd see him again. But fate, as it turns out, doesn't lose names the way families do. The plane eased to a full stop on the tarmac just seconds before we were scheduled to take off. The engine softened into an idle hum, and the overhead lights flickered slightly enough to draw attention, not alarm. Passengers shifted in their seats, glancing around, murmurs rising like steam. Then came the voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, calm and deliberate. "This is your pilot, Captain Rylan. We'll be holding for just a moment before departure." That wasn't standard. Not here, not now. I sat up straighter, glancing toward the front of the cabin, but from row 30, all I could see were the backs of heads and the sharp blue curtain that marked the divide between first class and everyone else. The cockpit door opened. Captain Michael Rylan stepped into the aisle. He was older than I remembered, grayer at the temples, but his posture still crisp, still military. His gaze scanned the rows as he walked forward steady and unrushed until he reached mine. "Ma'am," he said loud enough for the entire cabin to hear, "are you Colonel Camille Alden?" I looked up. Slowly, clearly, yes. He straightened fully, then shoulders back, chest lifted, and saluted. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice unwavering, "allow me to introduce Colonel Camille Alden, United States Air Force retired, Bronze Star, Distinguished Flying Cross, 25 years of service." A silence settled over the cabin so deep it felt physical. I heard it, how still everything became. The shift in breath, the weight of sudden knowing. She should not have been asked to move from her assigned seat. He continued, his eyes briefly scanning the surrounding rows. "And I would like to personally invite her to take seat 1A for the remainder of this flight." There was no applause, no clapping, just awe. Just people seeing me for the first time. I rose slowly. My knee ached as it always did, but I didn't grimace. I didn't limp. I let my spine do the talking. He extended a hand. I didn't need help, but I took it anyway, not for balance, but for what it meant. As I walked forward, past rows of strangers, past the empty gazes of passengers, who hadn't looked at me twice before I didn't look toward row 8. I didn't need to. I could feel the silence there. The breath caught in my mother's throat. The stiffness in my father's grip. The stillness in Joel's chest when he realized for the first time in his life he wasn't the one being saluted. When I sat in seat 1A, I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just breathed in. Because this time the air was mine. The leather of seat 1A was soft, cool against my spine. I let my hands rest quietly on my lap, my fingers brushing the worn edge of my name patch. The hum of the engines surrounded me again, steadier now, like something had settled not just in the aircraft, but in me. I expected the moment to end there. The announcement, the silence, the eyes. But it didn't. A man, maybe mid-50s jeans and a navy windbreaker, stood slowly from row 3. His steps were hesitant, but not unsure. He paused just beside my seat, one hand resting lightly on the headrest in front of me. "Colonel Alden," he asked, voice low, frayed with something deeper. I looked up. "Yes." He swallowed. "My son, Nathan, Corporal Nathan Reese, Afghanistan, 2009. My breath caught. That name I didn't remember the face. I never did. But the hands, the heat, the screaming over the radio. I remembered pressing down on a bleeding wound, barking for morphine, refusing to let a 20-year-old boy bleed out under a burning sky. "I think he said you pulled him out." I nodded once carefully. He made it home. The man's eyes shone glassy and bright. He's got 2 kids now, teaches high school science in Montana, still limps when it rains. But he's alive. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "I'm glad," I said softly. He pressed his hand briefly to his chest, like a private salute, then returned to his seat without another word. He didn't ask for mine. He didn't want a picture. He just needed to say thank you. Not long after, the young woman from earlier, my seatmate from row 30, appeared at the edge of the curtain. She didn't speak right away. She just smiled, tentative. "I thought it might be you," she said. "My dad used to tell that story about the woman who saved him. He never forgot. Neither did I." I held her gaze, nodded gently. She didn't ask for confirmation. She didn't need it. She reached into her bag and handed me something folded. A postcard. A photo of her father in uniform, smiling with his arm around her at her high school graduation. "I think he would have wanted you to have this," she said. I accepted it with both hands. "Thank you," I whispered. As she left, the curtain swayed behind her, then fell still. In the quiet that followed, I leaned back against the seat, the engines rising again beneath us. This wasn't about my family anymore. Not about row 8 or the silence they wrapped themselves in. It was about the people who remembered, the ones who saw, and finally, the ones who said it out loud. I knew he was coming before I saw him. There's a certain kind of shuffle men like Joel make when they're not sure if they should be standing at all. When their confidence has worn thin, and all that's left is the uneasy echo of someone else's respect. I turned slightly in my seat just as the curtain parted. He stood there, hands deep in his pockets, eyes darting toward mine, then away. He looked older than I remembered. Not in years, but in the weight of being seen differently for the first time in his life from behind me. "Cam," he said just above a whisper. I didn't answer. I didn't know they were going to ask you to move," he continued. "I didn't think it would go like that." I studied him for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Then I said calmly, "You didn't stop it." He nodded slowly. "No, I didn't." His voice cracked just slightly. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I didn't reply right away. There were too many versions of that word I'd rehearsed hearing from him, but none ever sounded like this quiet, unscripted, almost ashamed. Some wounds, I said, my voice even don't heal just because someone says they're sorry. He nodded again, not defensive, not pleading, just small, smaller than I'd ever seen him. Behind him, I saw the faintest movement. My mother, arms crossed, standing just inside the divide, expression tight but unreadable. Her eyes locked with mine. She didn't speak. But she didn't look away either. And in that breath between us, something happened. Not apology, not warmth, but recognition. For the first time, she saw me as I was. Not as a daughter she never understood. Not as the disappointment who left, but as a person, a woman, a soldier. Her chin dipped barely noticeable. Then her arms dropped to her sides. The tension left her posture. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something. Joel stepped back. He didn't ask for a seat. Didn't try to hug me. He just whispered, "I hope you know. I do see you now." Then he disappeared behind the curtain. I turned back toward the window. No adrenaline, no bitterness, just stillness. Some distances don't close with a conversation. Some people don't come back with an apology. And some families remain broken, not out of cruelty, but because they were never taught how to hold anything whole. But in that moment, I didn't need to be held. I only needed to stop shrinking. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one walking away. They were. The rest of the flight passed in a kind of hush, the way a forest feels after a storm. Nothing falling, but everything shifted. Conversations stayed low, measured. Some passengers cast glances in my direction when they thought I wasn't looking. A few offered faint nods. Most simply sat with whatever the moment had stirred in them. I didn't move. Didn't need to. I let the quiet hold me. We landed just before noon. I stayed seated as the cabin filled with the rustle of bags and the clatter of seatbelts snapping free. I wasn't in a hurry. I had nothing left to chase. Not approval, not explanations. Only air, only space, and I had finally claimed both. As I stepped off the plane, a group of cadets stood near the gate waiting for their connection. Barely 20, maybe younger. They wore uniforms still stiff with newness boots polished too bright. One of them noticed me first. His eyes dropped to my insignia, then snapped up with recognition. Without a word, he nudged the others. In perfect unison, they straightened. No salute, no fanfare. Just the smallest, quietest nods of respect. I gave them the same in return. A thread passed between us, not made of rank or protocol, but of understanding, of survival. A week later, a letter arrived on my porch. Heavy envelope gold seal from the Department of Defense. I opened it with steady hands sitting alone in the fading light of late afternoon. A post-retirement commendation, an honorary advancement in recognition of service, performed with distinction and discretion. There were no cameras, no ceremony, just words on paper and the sound of wind brushing the leaves outside. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the windowsill. I didn't cry, I didn't smile. I just let the stillness settle, no longer afraid of it. For years, I'd carried their silence like a weight. I thought if I earned enough, sacrificed enough, maybe they'd love louder. Maybe they'd see me. But I finally understood I wasn't invisible because I failed them. I was invisible because I refused to play the part they'd written for me. And now, I wasn't playing anything. I was living, fully, quietly, without apology. The sky stretched wide beyond the glass. Somewhere behind another curtain, another daughter might still be waiting to be seen. I hope she doesn't wait too long. The air up here, it's thinner, yes, but it's honest.